Answer.
Get the latest weather, traffic, and news updates online at 560theanswer.com. Now, from the Signature Bank Studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft on AM 560. The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan Proft here. I'm anxious to pick up this book. It, I don't know. For some reason, it harkens back to When Corruption Was King, Bill Cooley's book. But I think Randy Barnett's is going to be a little bit more fact-based since he was on the right side of the law back in the 70s and early 80s as a young assistant state's attorney. Felony Review is the name of the book. The author, Randy Barnett, a Chicagoan, I think Cal City, if I'm remembering correctly. And I know he's a big shot at Georgetown law, but after he was a prosecutor, he was a law professor for a time at Kent. And then I think he went out east and wound up at Georgetown. Randy Barnett's a Georgetown law professor. As I said, he's the author of Felony Review, Tales of True Crime and Corruption in Chicago. Professor Barnett, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Dan. And I knew the Cooley brothers. I knew the Cooley that went bad, and I worked for Dennis Cooley, his brother,
oh, really?
Who was a Cook County state's attorney, and he's actually in my book. Of
course, everybody knows everybody. We don't want nobody sent. Yeah. So did you hang out? What was the Governor's Row? Did you hang out with like them and Fred Rohde?
I didn't hang out with them. Dennis was my senior to me, and I watched him try cases at 26th Street when I was working there before I went out into felony review and misdemeanor branch courts and all that. But then he became my supervisor at Branch 64, which was the auto theft court at 11th and State. So I got to know him pretty well.
Well, I mean, give us so. I mean, you're from Cal City, hard scrabble, Sin City upbringing. Maybe it wasn't that hard scrabble, but that makes it more fairy tale-ish. But you Northwestern, Harvard Law, you got the pedigree, but you come back and you're a Cook County prosecutor. Why?
Well, because when I was 10 years old, a television show came on called The Defenders, starring E.G. Marshall and Robert Reed as a father-son criminal defense team in New York. Filmed on location, very gritty, very realistic, and it made me want to be a lawyer. And then when I went on to law school, and I was fortunate enough to get into Harvard Law School after going to Northwestern, all the pressure or impetus is to become a big law firm lawyer and get a fancy clerkship. And my response was to my fellow classmates who said I would be wasting my degree by being a Cook County prosecutor, that I went to law school to do what I wanted to do, not to do what I didn't want to do. And I want to be a criminal lawyer. To me, being a criminal trial lawyer is what being a lawyer meant. And I got to be one at peak Cook County in a number of ways. And it was the most unforgettable experience of my life, which is why I decided to write Felony Review, Tales of True Crime and Corruption in Chicago, to kind of tell everybody what the real criminal justice system is like in Chicago and elsewhere.
So peak Cook County, so develop that for us, the time that you spent in the state's attorney's office.
Well, it was peak Cook County in two different ways. One is it was peak Cook County State's Attorney's Office because our office was extraordinarily professional and gifted. The people that were my supervisors were really, really good trial lawyers and also honest. I was very cynical going into the criminal justice system because my dad was a businessman on the south side of Chicago, and he schooled me in what the democratic machine was like in Chicago and what it was all like there. And so I went in with my eyes wide open, and if anything, I was sort of surprised that the prosecutor's office was completely honest and square and straight, whereas the rest of Cook County Circuit Court had problems. And that's the second peak Cook County. The second peak Cook County was peak Cook County corruption, which was capped off, as you know, by Operation Greylord and some other sting operations that were happening at the same time, which I talk about in the book, and it actually affected me in ways that going to provide a surprise ending in the book. I was didn't know about Operation Greylord, but I was connected to it indirectly. And so in my book, I name names because all the people I name were ultimately charged and prosecuted for what they did.
I mean, for people who don't recall or haven't read the history, didn't live through it or haven't read the history, I mean, that was. I mean, when you include all the trials, that operation went on for nearly the entirety of the 80s, and nabbed some 90 public officials, both practicing lawyers as well as sitting judges. I mean, it was a massive sting operation by the FBI and the IRS that really shook the Cook County Circuit Court system to its core, didn't it?
Absolutely. And it was happening during the second half of my tenure as a prosecutor. Unbeknownst to me, it was only revealed after I was a professor at Chicago Kent. But it actually was affecting me in ways I didn't realize while I was a prosecutor. And it was amazing. It was Christmas. Greylord was Christmas time for those of us who had to deal with these corrupt judges and who all had a feeling of immunity that nothing would ever happen to them because they basically ran the system. And our job was to try to mitigate whatever damage they could do, but there was no way we were going to really challenge the system itself. There was no way we could as individual prosecutors. However, all the people who I knew to be dirty all went down, except for one guy who I can also name because he's deceased, who was a corrupt lawyer that fixed a case out from under me and ended up representing all these defendants in federal court. And he ultimately was never charged.
Mm. And so some of the high-profile names, Richard Lefevre would be at the top of that list. State Representative Jimmy DeLeo at the time. There were cops charged. There were judges. I mean, it was expansive, and it really was.
Lefevre was a different investigation because that was a probe of traffic court, which was different than Greylord, which was about the regular courts, the misdemeanor branch courts, etc. But here's the point.
Okay, conflated the two.
There were multiple investigations, and I do think it shows that. Those of us who like states and are skeptical of the federal government, it shows that there is a purpose to have a federal government, to ride herd on states and to ride herd on one-party towns like Chicago, which are, corrupt in many different ways.
Well, and that's also where federal prosecutors like Dan Webb and Anton Valukas made their bones, wasn't it?
Absolutely. But it was Bernie Carey, who was the Republican state's attorney,
right,
who went to the feds and helped generate this investigation in the first place and contributed resources to the federal investigation. And he's a former FBI. He was a former FBI agent when he came into the office, served 2 terms, and was defeated halfway through my tenure there, or 3 years into my tenure there, by Richard Daley.
So when you talk about you were involved in Greylord, unbeknownst to you, give us some color on that.
Well, it kind of provides the surprise ending of the book. I don't want to give away.
All right, you don't spoiler it. Yeah, right. Okay.
No spoiler. But I do want to talk about Felony Review, what the title of the book is about, which is a Felony Review unit in Chicago, which, Dan, you probably know all about.
Yeah.
But in fact is relatively unique to Chicago, and that is Chicago police officers can't bring felony charges against an individual without the sign-off of a Cook County state's attorney, an assistant state's attorney. And that meant the creation of a full-time unit who had offices in the police stations. You didn't go to court. You worked in the police stations. You had your own squad car. And whenever the cops were ready to charge somebody or they needed your help on an investigation, you'd get in your car and go to the district or the area headquarters where they were. And you would assist by interviewing them, interviewing the witnesses, and if possible, interviewing the suspect and getting a confession if possible. And so for 9 months, I served on that unit. And that's where I really, really learned. I was really able to see the whole underbelly of the criminal justice system up close in ways that trial lawyers really never get to see.
So what do you think? I mean, because you were still in Chicago when this was becoming public and prosecutions were taking place, as you mentioned, at Kent as a law professor. So what do you think the sort of, with perspective now, the long-standing fallout from Greylord in that time period was for the state's attorney's office and the Cook County justice system writ large?
Well, it's hard for me to say because I left the criminal justice system. Then I left Chicago in the 90s to go to Boston University before going to Georgetown. So I don't have firsthand experience with what the system is like now. But, most of my fellow prosecutors who were excellent prosecutors, many of them went on to be circuit court judges now, and some of them are nearing retirement age. And so I do think it reformed the entire circuit court of Cook County. I'm not saying there's no corruption, but it wasn't like open season for corruption back then. And the kind of corruption that was always more pervasive and probably still exists is the it's who you know corruption, not the money payoffs, which is what Greylord was, but do you know who I am kind of corruption. And of course that exists everywhere, not just in Chicago. And I'm sure that continues to exist as well.
Yeah, well, and also too, I mean, this is layering in something that's more recent, but the identitarian politics that infected that office, most notably under Kim Foxx, where felony review will okay felony charges for someone who throws a big gulp on Kim Foxx, but will not okay felony charges for somebody who's a multiple-time loser who commits a crime with a gun, depending on, their identity characteristics. And that's really something that I think that there's a little bit of a turning away from that now, a little bit. But for 8 years, that was really the paradigm in Cook County, much to the decline in public safety.
Well, the decline of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office is a tragedy. And I watched that from afar in great distress because we were so professional. We were so proud. We had such swagger in doing our job. I mean, O.J. Simpson would have been guilty if my supervisors had tried that case, Bill Kunkel and Mike Ficcaro. If they had tried that case, he would have gone down the way John Gacy went down and the way Henry Brisbane, the I-57 murderer, went down. And then what happened after that, and it wasn't under Rich Daley, who was a good prosecutor, a good state's attorney before he ran for mayor. Although it got a little more political near the end of his tenure as well. But what happened after that is just such a tragedy for Cook County and for good governance. And in fact, coincidentally, one of the people that ran against Kim Foxx, I think it was Kim Foxx, or maybe he ran against the successor, the person who ultimately got the job after her. Pat O'Brien was somebody I tried a jury trial in front with when he and I were both prosecutors together. And I mention him in the book, and I talk about what his campaign was about, but he lost. And unfortunately, the state's attorney's office declined to the point where their top prosecutors, including their very top assistant, left that office in protest over the politicization of prosecutions in Cook County.
Now, I mean, you were there when violent crime was a real issue. It's always been, but I mean, there was, compared to just the aggregate stats today, the 70s and 80s was worse in many respects. Now, it was also a much more populous city than it is today. But I wonder the conversations that we're having today about repeat violent offenders, the habitual violent criminals that we can't seem to get removed from society, that are turned back out to prey on people again and again. Most recently, the highest profile case that went international was, of course, that terrible incident where that young woman was burned on CTA, on the L, by somebody who had 72 prior arrests and all sorts of jail time and so forth. I just wonder what the culture was like at that time in terms of the approach to saying, like, it's a small percentage of people that commit a preponderance of these violent crimes, and we really need to focus upon them. You hear some of that rhetoric in big cities these days, but with a lot of these Soros-funded prosecutors, including the one we had in Kim Foxx, that simply hasn't been the case.
Well, our office was very tough on crime. We were not tough on first possession drug crimes, and that's one of the reasons why my boss lost to Rich Daley, who ran as a tough on drugs candidate. But we were very, very tough on all other crimes. Now, here's the thing I noticed when I was in the system, and I don't think it's changed very much, and that is two things. Number one, our juvenile court justice system trains criminals. It trains, because it teaches juveniles that nothing will happen to them until they become adults, and then they're surprised when something does happen to them because they were used to walking out of the system without even a slap on the wrist. And our misdemeanor court system has never treated misdemeanors the way I think with the seriousness it should have. I think if misdemeanors are crimes, they're punishable up to a year in jail, and if we treated misdemeanors more seriously, I think we'd have fewer felonies. But that's not the way things are set up across the country, where those high volume courts, dispose of people, very, very easily and readily, and wait until they really and wait until they commit a murder before they take it very seriously.
And the posture towards the street gangs, I mean, certainly back when you were there, it was more organized. There was more of a clear power structure because we're talking about the days of, Jeff Fort. But I wonder how, again, like the thinking, the approach, the strategy to deal with these ongoing violent criminal organizations like some of the bigger street gangs in Chicago.
Well, Felony Review opens with a confession I took from a member of the Latin Kings who he and his three fellow Latin Kings took three guys who came from the suburbs to buy marijuana out into an alley and butchered them to death, stabbed them to death one after the other. Because the Latin Kings did not have any marijuana, but one of these kids from the suburbs thought that they just didn't trust him. So he tried to ingratiate him with telling stories about all the hits he'd been on with the Latin Eagles, not realizing he was talking to the Latin Kings. Once he opened his mouth, the Latin Kings said, "Oh, wait a second, we can find marijuana. We know where there's marijuana. Come with us." And that's when they took him into an alley and stabbed them to death, one after the other. The book opens with a very chilling confession taken from one of those suspects, one of those defendants. And then the chilling words that he told me after I got finished with the entire written confession, and I asked him if he would do it all over again. And he said, well, if it was a sure thing. And I said, well, there's no such thing as a sure thing. And he said, yeah, but a lot of the Latin Kings have killed people without getting caught. And I said, yeah, but you were caught. Would you do it again? And he said, well, I'd have killed the first one for sure. I'm not sure about the other two. The first one is the guy that was mouthing off. Mm-hmm. So that's what I had to deal with. We didn't deal with organized crime in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, but we did deal with gang crime, and many of the cases I was involved with, such as that one, involved gangs. But But Juan Caballero, the guy that was convicted and sentenced to death as a result of that massacre that he participated in, he had a sentence commuted by the governor, Governor Ryan, who was trying to curry favor with the establishment before he got prosecuted. And so Juan Caballero's his sentence was commuted to life imprisonment.
Yeah, well, another different kind of corruption story in Chicago. Randy Barnett, Georgetown law professor, author of the new book released today, Felony Review: Tales of True Crime and Corruption in Chicago. Felony Review is the book. Professor Randy Barnett is the author. Pick it up. Professor Barnett, thanks for joining us.
Everybody in Chicago needs to buy this book, and if they read it, that's even better.
Very good. At least buy it, minimum.
Yeah, but buy the book. Buy the book is all I'm asking.
Professor Barnett, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Okay, take care, Dan.
Take care. And he joined us on Chicago's Morning Answer.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
And now it's time for the Cat's Corner.
We need more common sense in Washington. Running a country is like running a business. Well, our current president, President Trump, knows how to run a business. And guess what? He's running a country like that. He makes common sense